All right, the scene has changed. We'll open our congregational meeting with words from the 20th century Unitarian theologian James Luther Adams, who writes, "I call that church free, which enters into covenant with the ultimate source of existence, that sustaining and transforming power not made with human hands. It binds together families and generations, protecting against the idolatry of any human claim to absolute truth or authority. This covenant is the charter and responsibility and the joy of worship in the face of death as well as life. I call that church free, which brings individuals into a trusted, caring fellowship that protects and nourishes their integrity and spiritual freedom, that yearns to belong to the church universal. It is open to insight and conscience from every source. It bursts through rigid tradition, giving rise to new and living language, to new and broader fellowship. It is a pilgrim church, a servant church, on an adventure of the Spirit. The goal is the prophethood and priesthood of all believers, the one for the liberty of prophesying, the other for the ministry of healing. It aims to find unity in diversity, under the promptings of the Spirit that bloweth where it listeth, and make all things new." We'll light our chalice. So we're going to first have Keith McGuffey talk a little bit about the mechanics of how this morning is going to go.
Good morning. Good morning. Oh, there we go. So what a blessing it is that we can hold this meeting in a multi-platform manner so that everyone can participate as they please, whether in person or online. However, there's some challenges with this hybrid model, and we have to vote a bit differently. We've worked out the logistics of voting to the best of our ability, and here's what the board has come up with that will work best for this particular platform. Please give us some grace. So votes will be conducted online after the meeting through a Google form you will receive in your email. Oscar and our office workers have also identified folks who may need paper ballots. Those ballots have been mailed out to those individuals. You can also contact the office for a paper ballot. If all else fails, you can call our office and cast your vote that way, but please be sure to only cast your vote one time, no matter what you do. Quorum for this meeting will be decided based on the number of votes received. There are no absentee ballots for this meeting. Votes will be counted as long as they are submitted within 24 hours of the end of this meeting. Please feel free to take your time, think through the issues before casting your vote. Thank you.
24 or 48?
48.
Thank you, Keith. Welcome to the 2021 Winter Congregational Meeting. Did you ever think it was going to get here? Well, I am Lori Stratman. I am the president of your Board of Trustees. And it is my pleasure to be able to give you the president's report. And we've actually done quite a bit since our last report, so I want to share some of these really neat things. First of all, you all should have gotten a call from a board member at some point in October or November. And it was personally a great pleasure to get to speak with folks that I don't normally get a chance to talk to. And that is the feedback that I got from a lot of the board members as they were making their calls. So thank you for making that such a pleasurable experience. I wanted to share with you some of the things that popped up from those conversations. And they aren't necessarily all congruous. Some things were great for some people and not so great for others. But I still wanted to share this out. So some of the things that I thought we're really connected to our community. Some folks said having online community has helped keep their sanity during this time of pandemic, while others felt that they were more isolated because we weren't in person. So there's that dichotomy again. We wanted to play a bigger part in our community as a whole, was the comment of a lot of folks. And a big one was share the plate. Instead of just sharing our money, which is a good thing, we also heard that we'd like folks to share their time and expertise to those that we are sharing our plate with. Food for thought. A lot of folks said that they felt isolated and there was nothing going on in the church. And, well, given the amount of activities that people are involved in, I kind of wonder if that's true. So I'm just going to list a not inclusive list of all the things we're doing. So this is not exhaustive, right? So we've got Bridge, we've got the LGBTQA Welcoming Committee, music, choir, the Membership Umbrella Committee, the UU Connects, meditation group, open circles, ground maintenance, facilities cluster, AV group, ushers, program council, the annual auction, finance committee, men's group and potluck, Luff committee, green sanctuary, the women's march on reproductive rights, the board of trustees, social justice committee, RGL volunteers, although we could always use more, Beloved Conversations, book group, Interfaith Housing Coalition, Friendly Faces, Nominations Committee, Fresh Start, Lincoln Pride Parade. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. So thank you all for all you've been doing. At the time that we made our calls, we were not holding in-person services. So some of the things that I'm going to mention next about concerns has actually been resolved, at least in some fashion. And I'm happy to share what the concerns were and also share a little bit about how we've resolved those. So there was a concern that membership is down. Not the case. We still have a very strong membership of 300 plus members. So while we may have seen a few folks leave for whatever means, whether they've moved away or have passed away, or have just decided that this is not their place anymore, we've had a lot more people join up with us too. So that's a blessing. So no fears on our membership falling. For those who were not engaging in online services, they were feeling a little disconnected, but we're back, right? So yay, yay. And in spite of being active, some folks were still feeling a little disconnected. I hope that the in-person part is helping those folks feel more connected. Some folks indicated that online church services weren't as satisfying as in-person. Well, we're back. They were concerned that pledge drives were not bringing in enough to keep us financially afloat. We're doing pretty good, folks. We can always use more, but we are doing pretty good. We are not bankrupt by any means. And we're in a much better place than some of our fellow churches. There was a fear of losing staff due to insufficient pledges. And that's always going to be a concern, right? We want to make sure that we have our staff here doing the best work that they can with the resources that we can give them. So just keep that in mind. We're not looking at staff cuts for this next year. God willing, and the river don't rise, right? But do keep that in mind, that we always want to make sure that our staff is well taken care of. And finally, a lot of folks said they were zoomed out. Oh boy, do I get that. A lot of us work on Zoom all week long, and then church is another Zoom. So hopefully those of you who are Zoomed out can actually be here. So the last thing I want to talk about with the call campaign was about things people would like to see us do in the future as a church. And I'm just going to go through those, and if something strikes your fancy, maybe you want to get something started on that. More diversity on the committees. Getting new volunteers, new blood to get new ideas. An inclusion of art beyond music. Revitalization of the coffee house on Fourth Fridays. Continuation of anti-racism work that we are engaged in. Adoption of the 8th principle. Being in person for community connection. You were there. Activities to reacquaint everyone when we are in church in person. Is anybody feeling like we've kind of forgotten who each other is? We don't recognize faces or names quite as quickly as we had been. Yeah. Capital campaign for a new sanctuary. Involvement of different people in leadership rather than the same volunteers over and over. Oh boy, would I love that. Unscripted, unstructured, and unprogrammed social activities. And recognition of staff for all their efforts. So that is my little bit on what we were talking about on those phone calls with y'all. And thank you for that. The next thing I'd like to go over is our church priorities for the year. These are the 3 top priorities that the board came up with at their retreat in August. Hopefully you've heard about them by now. But just in case, I wanted to go ahead and go over them and tell you a little bit about how we've been addressing those as a board. So our priority number 1 is to deepen connections and increase engagement with our church community, including our children, youth, and young adults. So in July, we were ahead of the game, the Board of Trustees were visited by Wesley Botham and Kelly Ross, and they wanted to discuss hosting a young adult conference here in the church. And we are so on board with that. So when the time comes that they are able to do that, we'll be hosting a young adult conference. It's very exciting. In October, when the trustees called our pledging units, all of you all, we wanted to connect and talk about things we wanted to do. So that's part of our connection piece, right? And I already went over all the things we learned on that. Our second priority is to continue engagement with the world through our commitment to dismantle racism, address the effects of climate change, and recertify the LGBTQA+ welcoming committee status, or welcoming congregation status, sorry. So the board's task force for dismantling white supremacy has been instrumental in garnering support and participating in the beloved conversations. And we are currently in the among phase. That's the second round where we commit as a group to work on our policies and practices that may have some white privilege in it that we're just not aware of. It happens. And in a moment, I'll have Judy come and talk about what the Among group is doing. We also had the Green Sanctuary come and talk to us about what they want to do. In November, Rachel Herpel came and talked to us about the vision for the Green Sanctuary. And this is an official shout out for the Green Sanctuary. Get involved with the Green Sanctuary. They would love more volunteers. There is so much to do and can be done, but there's so few people doing it. So the more that we can help the Green Sanctuary, be part of the Green Sanctuary, the more we can do. The LGBTQ welcoming congregational status is underway, and it has full support of the board. And the program council has been kind of keeping us up to date on that. So if you have any questions about that, you can always contact Deb Hope or Karen Hafer. Next priority is to develop a timeline and funding plan for our building and grounds and maintenance and replacement needs. Let's face it, parts of our church are a little worn, so we got to take care of them, right? In November, Harry Hafer came and talked to the board about those sorts of repairs, maintenance, upkeep, and he is currently working with several folks in the program clusters to identify those pieces of equipment, building maintenance, grounds maintenance that we need to be pre-planning for, such as replacement of a dishwasher or resealing windows or things like that, okay? So things that we can pre-plan for. So we're excited to start working on a plan to be prepared for those. The next thing I'm going to talk about, those were our 3 priorities. If you have any questions about them afterwards, feel free to talk to me. The next thing we did during this board year is, due to an uncertainty in our recent budgetary shortfalls and so forth, we were unable to give any significant salary raises to our minister staff. That hurts a lot for me personally. But we did put together an acknowledgement that the board approved that outlines a map for getting our staff and minister to the salary points that they really ought to be at for our GEO index. So I just wanted you to know that is one of the things that we did as a board this year. One of the things that is part of that acknowledgement and part of our planning is an item that is up for vote, and that is a change in Oscar's title, and I'll get to that in a while. Because we weren't able to give salary increases, but as you probably know by now, we did have a bit of extra money this year, thank goodness. We already approved to give bonuses to our staff and to the minister. It's a one-time payment for the year 2021 in recognition of all of the heavy lifting they've been doing this past 2 years. So at least we could recognize them that way. On a personal note, I would like to thank every one of you for who have been instrumental in keeping our church vibrant and viable. There's a lot of good work going on in spite of the challenges that we've had with budget and pandemic. And your compassion and dedication and kindness are what makes this place a community and thrive. All right, so the next thing we've got is Judy, if you'd like to come and talk about our beloved conversations.
Thanks, Lori. Hi, I'm Judy Hart, member of the Board of Trustees, and I wanted to update you on our church's participation in the Beloved Conversations program. So I know some of you don't even know what that is, so I thought I would catch you up on what it is. Beloved Conversations is a national program for Unitarian Universalists seeking to embody racial justice in a spiritual practice. That's a lot to think about. When you're putzing, you can think about that. So, Beloved Conversations is meeting virtually and consists of multiple parts. Part one is called Within, and it was launched in the fall of 2020. Within focuses on the individual and the personal work that we each need to do in racial justice. And the Unitarian Church of Lincoln had over 50 members participate in the Within sessions. That's pretty amazing. So the second part is called Among, which Lori mentioned, which was launched in the fall of 2021. In the second phase of the Beloved Conversations program, Among teams from Unitarian Universalist congregations take their individual learnings that we each got from the Within phase, and we collectively focus on institutional change in our congregations. And there's a lot of people here in the room who are participating in that, and I couldn't remember how many churches nationally were participating. Does anybody remember? Is anybody? I think it's about 20. It's not every congregation. So we had to apply to be a participant, and our church was accepted to be part of this Among Beloved Conversation, which is remarkable. I'm one of the 20 members from our church participating in the second phase. In our Among sessions, our group of 20 is working with 2 coaches that are dedicated to our group, the Reverend Elka Carrier-Ladd, who lives in Revere, Massachusetts, and Sarah Osborne, a third-year seminarian at Meadville Lombard Theological School. Our team of 20 and our coaches will continue to meet and work together through May of 2022. And we've been meeting since, does anybody remember, was our first meeting in September? Right, so we've been meeting, I think we've met probably 5 times since we began. So it's a commitment, and I think every person in our group is really happy they committed to it. Our goals for the Among session is to better understand the ways dominant white culture is woven into the congregational system. It's to explore possibilities for change in up to 2 chosen areas of congregational life, to learn from examples of others who've made bold changes, and to center the spiritual needs and voices of Black, Indigenous, and people of color, and finally to create a plan for change that fits the congregation and context. So we 20, we should probably publish the names sometime of the 20 people in the group, because if you have any suggestions, and you could reach out to a friend and say, I wonder if you're talking about this. But our Among team will participate in a January Sunday service. You'll learn a little bit more, and we'll continue to keep you updated on our progress. So thank you for giving me the opportunity to catch everybody up on that.
Okay, and then next up, we're going to have a report from the Love Committee. And yes, Dorothy's going to give that.
Well, good morning, everybody. I'm going to read this page. It was prepared for by Christy, and Christy was going to read it and asked me to read it. So this is Christy speaking. And who are you? I'm Dorothy Ramsey. And who's Christy? Christy, she's the president of the Love Committee. And her last name is Wamstead. Yes, that's all in here. The principal purpose of Lincoln Unitarian Foundation, parenthesis, LUF, shall be to acquire property, both real and personal, by gift or bequest, and to provide for an increase by suitable investment to support the building, any addition, new building, and contents therein, the grounds or equipment, and to support the general welfare and use of the Unitarian Church of Lincoln, Nebraska. That's the charge that the committee was given when it was founded. Now, there's 3 points that are on this that I'm going to speak about, and I'll let you know each point so you'll know when we're nearing the end of this. It's not near as long as it seems. I brought my budget and other stuff up with me. Point 1, Love Committee members. In 2021, the Love Committee welcomed 3 new members. Emily Chattil and Trey Lusk were nominated to a 3-year term beginning in June, and Elizabeth Meyer was appointed to fill a vacancy through at least May of 2022. Thank you to Jean Hanlon, Alan Worth, and Trish Lanning for their commitment and leadership over the years. In June, Christy Wamstead was selected as Love Committee President, Gary Colvin continued as Love Committee Secretary, and Dorothy Ramsey continued as Love Committee Financial Secretary. Point 2, financials. As of November 2021, the Love Committee is managing a total of $4,448,275.36 in investments from Vanguard. $350,000 approximately is in mutual funds and $100,000 approximately in money market. And an additional $11,919.14 from the Dr. Judy Cole Fund that is designated for the UCL music program. Compared to this time approximately a year ago, funds invested by the Love Committee have increased by almost 36%. However, that is not all investment growth. There was a distribution of $5,530.70 made in March of 2021 to address a shortfall in the 2020 budget, and payments made for a memorial bench for Amy Berkey and AV equipment on behalf of Don Pinkley. During the 2021 spring congregational meeting, the congregation voted to use $20,000 of Dr. Judy Cole Fund to replenish the budget standing reserve fund, and the balance thereafter, not including money set aside for the UCL music program, to be used at the Board of Trustees' discretion. Point 3 is the activities of the committee. In addition to overseeing the long-term investment fund, the Love Committee manages a more flexible anniversary fund that may be used for materials or activities identified by the Program Council. Money for the anniversary fund comes from members who contribute upon their membership anniversary. This year, anniversary funds have been used to purchase a set of nice tablecloths for the memorial services and other events. Providing financial literacy to members of the congregation is important to the Love Committee members. This year, we were able to arrange 3 presentations. Tyler Manquest presented on responsible investing, align your principle with your principles in January, and Smarter Charitable Giving in April. In November, Lowell Brooks presented on estate planning. Also, the Love Committee has worked with the Treasurer and Board of Trustees to create a financial intake form as part of its gift acceptance process. This form may be used by anyone at any time to notify the church of designations for current or future funds, such as bequests, beneficiary status, and so forth. Sincerely, Christy Wamstead, Love Committee President.
Thank you, Dorothy, in the guise of Christy. All right, next we're going to have the treasurer's report, and you'll note that our treasurer is on our Zoom camera over here. So watch over there instead of over here.
All right, so we're going to try this. Teresa, can you try saying something? Okay, so we still can't hear you. Sorry, everybody. This is the first time we've done this. Let's see. All right, let's try that
We're good to go?
Yes, and I'm going to get out of the way.
Okay. Oh, thanks to our audio engineer. I'm Teresa Forsman, our church treasurer. The 2022 budget that the Board of Trustees is recommending for the congregation's approval today is $479,317. This represents an increase of just under 6% compared with our current 2021 budget. You might know that this is basically the rate of inflation that we've been seeing in the headlines this fall. So we have notable increases for 2022 in our health insurance premiums and our dental insurance premiums. And like most members of our congregation, the church is going to be paying more for heat in 2022. On the income side, I'm very happy to report that in the fourth quarter of 2021, we had robust pledge and donation payments, which have pushed so far our 2021 income up to almost 110% of budgeted income. On the expense side for the current year, a few things are lower than expected because we weren't in the building as much as we had hoped we would be. So expenses for such things as childcare and some of the fellowship programs that happen when we're in the church, those were lower for 2021. So the combination of more income than we budgeted, including a Paycheck Protection Program grant, and lower expenses in some areas mean that we are fairly confident that we will have a surplus for 2021 of approximately, conservatively, $50,000. Yeah, congratulations to us. Yeah. We have taken almost $20,000 of that expected surplus and put it in the budget on the income side for 2022. The biggest chunk of our income, which is pledges and donations beyond pledges, is basically flat with 2021. There's just one new item in the 2022 budget on the expense side. It's $106,000 for a transitional salary for administrative director. And that covers the 5 extra hours a week that our member admin coordinator will be working from April 1st through June 30th to help cover duties during our administrative director's sabbatical. I can't talk about the 2022 budget without talking about Bruce Raymer, who in the last days of the pledge campaign offered up to $10,000 in matching donation for people who increased their pledge or made a commitment to donate above and beyond their pledge. And good for us, our congregation earned that entire $10,000. So thank you to Bruce. Thank you to every member of our congregation who is helping us get where we want to go in 2022.
So in order to take questions, Teresa should be able to hear this. So Linda and I will run microphones, and Teresa, if you can't hear the questions that are being asked, just make a sudden motion.
Okay.
You won't be on the live stream if you don't have a microphone, so please be patient.
I was curious why the accounting consultant cost more than doubled compared to the 3-year average and was up substantially from the 2021 budget.
My understanding, we haven't used the accounting consultant as much as we did this year. And my understanding is that we under budgeted for the current year. And so we don't want to make that mistake in 2022. The machinations around tax law and benefit calculations, et cetera, have only gotten more complicated. And so, it pays to have an accountant dotting the I's and crossing the T's.
Hello? Yes. Yeah. I just want to make a comment on energy costs for this winter. I follow that pretty closely, natural gas certainly, but if people will watch the thermostat in this room, this is really the only room and a bit out in the gathering place, or the gallery, that are on natural gas. Everything else is on electricity, which should be very stable, but if people will keep the thermostat cranked down on this room, we'll be fine.
This is Harry Hafer. I asked this question at the last town hall, but I just want to, ask, this will be dealing with the electronic giving fees, which is line 105, specifically E07800, but $2,500, I guess I would really encourage the office staff, whatever, to look for a way that would give the option at least for people to pay that themselves when they're using their credit card or otherwise. I'm not a texting donator myself to know how it works on that side of it, but I know I've seen very many other on-site payments by credit card to other nonprofits where that is a specific line that you can check and say, yes, I'll pay that $2.50 or $4 or whatever it might amount to. But I think it's only fair that those who want the convenience of a credit card should also be paying for that convenience by paying the convenience fee and not making the rest of us basically cover that $2,500 of expense.
I have a question about Lori's report having to do with finances, and that has to do with the bonuses, which I think is a wonderful thing. But I'm just wondering what's the source of the money for those bonuses.
Do you want to answer that, or do you want me to, Lori?
Teresa, if you want to answer it, that's...
Sure. When it became clear that we were going to have a surplus for 2021, the board did not want to be imprudent and put in raises for 2022 that we might not be able to meet. But they thought the prudent conservative course would be to still do what they could to acknowledge the staff, and thus the bonuses, which were a small one-time commitment rather than an ongoing commitment. So it was a board decision, and it seemed to be the conservative option.
As a practical matter, it came out of our 2020 budget, not our 2021 budget.
Right, and the total amount was $8,500.
Harry Hafer, I was thinking you might have misspoken on the transitional administrator directory salary dollar amount accidentally, Teresa. And I see there's a Facebook post on that too here, but $1,006, and I think you accidentally said 100,000 or something, but anyway. I thought I heard that, and I was going to ask that question myself, and I saw it got clarified here too, so, but I believe it's $1,006 according to the paperwork I have here. Thank you.
I didn't realize I said that. Sorry. Thank you.
Are there any other questions?
Do you have questions from online?
No, I've been checking. There are no specific questions from online. If folks are watching online, there is about a 15-second delay, so if you do have questions, send them in. We can double back to any other things that have come up. I'll turn it back over to Lori.
All right. So the next thing I wanted to go over is regarding the proposal to change Oscar's title. And the title change would be to senior minister. And the board has talked about this quite a bit. The reasons that we would like to change his title to senior minister is there's multiple reasons. It's in recognition of his transition from a partial to full fellowship in 2020. It's in recognition of 5 years of leadership through a period of significant change. Think of all the changes we've made. That's a lot of heavy lifting. And quite frankly, we couldn't have done it without his leadership. Also in recognition of what we've been unable to do is in terms of his salary. As I alluded to earlier, the UUA in 2019 changed our GEO index, which puts salary midpoint higher than when he was initially hired, which means he's a bit away from that midpoint. Okay, quite a bit away from that midpoint. So this is one way that we can show our appreciation while not being able to give him that salary raise that we want to give him immediately. Also, it's by recognizing him as a senior minister, it prepares our church for one of our earlier strategic goals. Prior to the pandemic, one of our strategic goals was to get an intern minister. Oscar would be mentoring that intern. We still want to do that. Now, granted, we can't do it this next year like we had planned on, but it's still part of our strategic plan. And by being senior minister, then he has the ability to be the mentor for that intern. Also, and I think in part this is the most important part for me, is that Oscar's no longer a novice, right? He has done so much as a professional, both in our church and in the Lincoln community, that I think elevating him to the senior minister status in title, makes a lot of sense. So this is one of the things that we'll be voting on that online form or that paper copy within the next 48 hours. So I hope you will give that good consideration and make your vote accordingly. The next thing we're going to talk about is our nominee for the nominations committee. And before I have, let's see, who's here to talk about that? I'm not seeing Carol or Marge. Okay, maybe I'll talk about that. It's the Lori Show. No kidding. Before we get into who that nominee is, I want to mention that our bylaws have us take a 2-week review. We need 14 days prior to the vote to have that announcement of who it's going to be. However, we did not get the nomination name until December 2nd. Okay? That means we're going to be a few days short of that 2-week review period. One of the things on the ballot is going to be an ask to suspend that rule for this particular vote. Okay. Christy Wamstad, who has been serving the rest of Karen Hafer's tenure on the nominations committee, did agree to become a nominee for her own tenure on the nominations committee. So that's our candidate, if you will. So that will be on the ballot as well to make that vote. Now, if she doesn't get voted in, that means the board has to appoint someone. So we won't be without someone, but it would be really nice if the board didn't have to decide who it was. Okay, just saying. Okay, and then for our final report, I'm going to have Oscar provide his report.
Can I ask a question on that nomination change? Because
Harry's got a question about the nomination change, so we'll take that.
obviously we have a vote coming out via email, so normally there'd be a motion to approve and all that stuff and that change. Is that part of this email coming out for the voting then, to make that change to accept?
Right, yes, that is
Okay.
actually a piece on the ballot, so that you will have 4 things to vote on.
Okay.
One is the budget. One is the title change. One is to suspend the 2-week rule for election. And then the 4th is the nomination for the nominations committee.
Thank you.
Yep. Thank you, Harry. And then Kathy's got a question over here.
It's a random question. Sorry, Kathy Disney, it's a random question. Is the Luff report or any other reports that are given in the context of this meeting going to be available in print or in writing in some form on the website or somewhere so that we can look at them in depth? Or look at them at all?
Dorothy, do you put the Luff report on a website? I'm not sure.
I have, but I see no reason not to.
And Oscar's got a response here.
Yeah, the budget is definitely on the website. We can get the Luff report on the website. Traditionally, the president's and minister's reports are verbal reports at this meeting. So there'll be a video of this meeting that goes on, that will live on the internet forever.
Oh, joy.
But I can tell you, the written part of my report has a lot of arrows and looks a little like a conspiracy theory, so I probably won't post that.
Any other questions before we move on to Oscar's report?
There are 2 questions online, both from Marge Willicke. The first is, the congregants of this church are voters. Have we had adequate information to inform our decision about how to vote? Question. Are there criteria, perhaps from UUA, to determine if a minister has earned a title change? And then a third question, also from Marge Willicke. Can a church employ an intern if the minister is not a senior minister? You want me to walk the...
Yeah. Let me look at this. Okay. All right. Okay, so we'll just take it one at a time here. So the question on have we had adequate information to inform our decision on how to vote? We've had 3 town halls, folks. I hope you have sufficient information to make a good vote. Okay. Okay, so let me go over that again. When we leave today, everybody's going to get an email about a link to go to for a Google form. The Google form is pretty self-explanatory. I've looked at it. It's easy peasy. You just click on your vote and you submit. For those who are not voting by the email, they've got paper ballots that have been mailed to them. They say the same thing on them. They just need to check mark it, send it back to the church. There's also a third option, and that is that you can call the church office and tell the person who answers what your votes are. And like Keith said, only vote once. Okay. There has been mention of that. I know because I've watched Oscar's videos and have read the e-blasts. So I'm hopeful that, yeah. Okay. All right. Then the question about are there criteria from the UUA possibly to determine if a minister has earned a title change? There isn't anything specific on that, okay? I have looked, but honestly, it is the decision of the congregation to make that determination, and you're just going to have to vote with what's in your heart, okay? Now, I'm going to put out there that personally, if I'd been in a job doing this sort of heavy lifting for 5 years without that sort of recognition, I'd quit. Just saying. And I work for the state, right? They are stingy with promotions or title changes. So I'm just putting that out there. Let's see. And then Marge also asked, can a church call or employ an intern if the minister is not a senior minister? And yes, we can. But it does make the distinction a bit easier for folks who are outside of the church to understand who's in charge in terms of the ministry and who is being mentored, okay? And then Marge asked, what's the rush? Could we delay the decision to a future congregational meeting? And I would rather not, because the board has been kicking this around for quite some time, okay? Again, if I had been employed for 5 years doing the heavy lifting without any type of recognition, I would quit. Okay, just putting it out there. All right. And then Kelly Ross also mentioned on the voting that if someone at the office does not answer, if you're wanting to phone your vote in, leave a message on the voicemail system. Make sure to include your name so that we can verify that you are a member and that you're only voting once. Okay. All right. Do we have any other comments before the minister's report? And it looks like Joellen has a comment here or a question.
I think we're all very aware of what Oscar has done within our church and for our church, but I'm wondering if he's had any activities outside our immediate church that we may not be fully aware of.
Thank you, Joellen. Yes. So Oscar is and I forget what is it, director, president, chair of the Interfaith, the president of the Interfaith Coalition currently. And Joellen would like to know what that is. So Oscar, go ahead.
That's probably a thing for me to answer. So for the last year and a half, I have served as the president of the Faith Coalition of Lancaster County. For a year before that, I served on their board. The Faith Coalition of Lancaster County grew out of a series of interfaith organizations. The current iteration dates back about 15 years. It is an interfaith organization dedicated to education and mutual support among the faith communities in Lincoln, Nebraska. So for many, many years, if you saw Steve Griffin at an event, he was representing the Faith Coalition of Lancaster County. He retired for real this time, and I am in the role that he held for about 12 years. In addition, I've served as a transitions consultant in the UUA, informally as a mentor for newer ministers in the UUA, and a lot in the last 2 years of resource sharing, as I think what this church has done in the pandemic is a model for other Unitarian Universalist churches, and we have been often in the last 2 years. So I'm going to go to Harry and then Kurt.
Yeah, I was just going to say, when I first saw this proposal for senior, I kind of thought, well, what would be the purpose of that? And I've gained information from what's been shared, and my initial thought was most, seniors seem, at least with other congregations, other faiths, there's other ministers, junior ministers, whatever you want to call them, also at that church, which we don't have the size or budget for that. But having heard the information, I support it. I don't have any issues or qualms about it myself, and I hope folks will also vote to support it. And here's Kurt.
I've got a question for Oscar and a sneaky plug for this afternoon. At 4 o'clock here, we're going to be having a session talking about church history from the 150 committee, and everybody, hope to see everybody there. But is it not true, Oscar, that a Universalist minister from the First Universalist Church started a ministerial coalition or a ministerial group in the 1870s and then was voted off of it as not being correct?
That is a true part of our history. You should come at 4 o'clock or read about it in our gallery. That is also what happened to the Universalists generally, is that the Universalist Convention of America got booted out of the National Council of Churches for not being Christian enough. But for that, look for a sermon sometime in the future. FCLC is intentionally interfaith, which means it's interfaith as opposed to ecumenical. So that means that it is not a Christian organization. It involves the Jewish communities here in Lincoln, the Muslim community in Lincoln, the Hindu community in Lincoln, the Buddhist community in Lincoln. And so it is an attempt to build ties across houses of worship, not just Christian or Protestant ones. I believe I'm okay in that, yes.
All right, just going to check the feed here. Okay, I don't think there's anything there that we need to be concerned with. Any further comments, Joellen?
Yes, I'm wondering if Oscar has a relationship with other Unitarians in the state of Nebraska or in this area. Does he play any role in that?
Well, just last week he was out in Kearney.
Yeah, I can take that up in my report.
All right. Okay. So without further ado, let's go ahead and hear Oscar's report.
right. So I usually begin these reports with a review of what has happened since the last report. That has made the minister's reports in the last year and a half particularly complicated and at times confusing. But I'm going to begin with what I hope is a brief summary of the changes that have happened since the last time we met in May of 2021. So when we last met, we had actually just moved back into this building in the spring of 2021. We began a re-entry following COVID-19 in April. By May, we were mostly fully back. Then the Delta wave crested right as this congregational year began on September 5th, so we moved back online. Then we moved back in person, and then left again for a week and came back. If you want dates for all of those things, I can provide them, but in the interests of time and everything, I'll come back to that. But we've been in and out, and about a month ago, we settled on what our plan is moving forward. But to start out, we've had a lot of back and forth in the last year. Over the summer, we participated in the second annual Unitarian Universalist Summer Worship Cooperative. This gets to the question that Joe Allen asked. One of the opportunities of the pandemic has been to build relationships with our sibling congregations in Kansas and Nebraska. So for the last 2 years, we've participated in a joint service venture with about 12 other congregations in our area. That area is actually our cluster of churches, and they are all congregations that we are in relationship with. They are all ministers that I know well, and that when we are in person, they are the group that would do, say, pulpit exchanges with us. The opportunity of the pandemic is that we can broaden that sense of pulpit exchange. So looking forward in March, Sherry Woodbury, who is the newly called minister at First Unitarian in Omaha, will preach here while I go preach in Omaha at her congregation. That's also what I was doing out in Kearney, but they are lay-led, so it was less an exchange and more a guest opportunity. We launched a new congregational year in September. We did that with this new live streaming technology that we spent much time and effort over the summer getting installed and figuring out how it worked. We restarted Third Thursday worship services, beginning with an outdoor service at Antelope Park and continuing over this fall with services like an online Trans Day of Remembrance, and coming up this week, a Christmas-themed service. There are at least some synthesizers and bells involved. The congregation has held a successful pledge drive in the month of October. Board members, as Lori described, called every member of the congregation. And then this, combined with better than expected income in 2021, has put the church on solid financial ground for the first time in 2 years. We've planned this fall for our administrative director, Gene Helms, to take a sabbatical this spring after 13 years of faithful service at the Unitarian Church of Lincoln. You may remember that in 2018, the board passed a sabbatical policy, and in 2019, our religious education director took a sabbatical. This is now the next one. And then down the road, in a couple years, I'll be sabbatical eligible myself. Personally, I've continued working on my doctorate. God willing, this spring, I will be done with coursework before the next congregational meeting. I will then just have a thesis to write, which I hear actually is the more complicated part. I've also been involved in early stages of planning an interfaith advocacy organization here in Lincoln. This is the as yet unnamed organization that Ben McConnell came and spoke about a couple weeks ago from our pulpit. I'll say, because it came up earlier, that this is actually distinct from the Faith Coalition of Lancaster County. The Faith Coalition is an educational organization. It is resolutely apolitical and uninterested in doing anything like advocacy work. This new organization that is forming is more directly interested in advocacy. And so the hope is that both organizations will exist and serve complementary purposes in Lincoln. So looking forward, with children's vaccines now available, we're looking at restarting our children's programming sometime in early 2022. So that's where we have been over the last year. I do want to take a couple minutes of my report to reflect a little bit on this moment that we're in as a congregation, because it is a complex one. We're moving into a new season of our congregational life. For the last 2 years, our community life together has been defined by the COVID-19 pandemic. 2 years. In December of 2019, so 2 years ago, 1 year and 50 weeks ago, I went to New York to visit my parents for Christmas. While I was there, my mother was very sick. As soon as I came home, she was hospitalized for a week with what was then an unexplained pneumonia. On January 12th of 2020, I was sick enough that for the first and only time in 5 congregational years, on Friday night, I texted a worship associate and said, I am not going to be there on Sunday. That was the day we launched 2 services. That's how sick I was. In retrospect, both my mother and I's doctors are pretty convinced that these were early COVID-19 cases. That was 2 years ago. So there's a lot of pieces of church life that started up as crisis response, midweek video updates, UU Connect groups. And these have become established parts of our community. If you do something for 2 years in a church, it is a tradition that it is very difficult to change. And then there are other pieces that have defined a lot of the Unitarian Church of Lincoln in the years leading up to the pandemic that have lain fallow for 2 years, and we should be honest about that. A second service, childcare for evening meetings, things that we spent a lot of time and energy getting off the ground. So one of my roles in these meetings, in congregational meetings, is to report on the work of UCL's professional staff. And so last month I wrote a memo to the board recommending for the first time that UCL consider modest end-of-year bonuses for our staff. And here's part of what I wrote in that report. Over the last 2 years, the staff team at the Unitarian Church of Lincoln has, out of necessity, done extraordinary work. They have launched new programs, rethought existing work, learned new skills, managed rapidly changing professional circumstances, and managed their own families' paths through the pandemic. Each of our staff members has areas where they have gone above and beyond their job description. Each has had at least one crisis in the last year that they handled professionally and gracefully. So this has been a challenging 2 years for congregational work. In the November UUA regional newsletter, Reverend David Pyle invited congregational leaders and members to have some compassion and show some support for your religious professionals. Not just the professional ministers, but all of your church staff who have been through more than 10 years of church adaptation in the last 2 years and have somehow made it work, but at an emotional, spiritual, and professional cost that is felt but difficult to name. So Reverend Pyle was writing about professional staff, but I actually think this is true of all of our members and our community as a whole. We have been through a lot of change in 2 years that we did not choose. That has come at an emotional, spiritual, and community cost that is felt but difficult to name. So my hope for all of us is that we show each other compassion and support in this season. in this season, because we are in a new season right now. Starting a month ago, we began to think of COVID-19 as an endemic, something that we're going to have to live with, not necessarily respond in the moment to. As much as Omicron is concerning right now, and it is, it doesn't change the basic calculus that we've been working on for the last 4 weeks. That our context for the foreseeable future has waves of COVID-19 in it. And so we've taken steps to fit our congregational life to that reality. So going forward, our priority really is going to be to keep this building open, depending on people to get vaccinated, and depending on non-medical interventions like mask wearing, like spreading chairs out in the sanctuary, and depending on each member's understanding of their own risk. That's why we have somebody presenting online. Because the question is not, how will we respond to this COVID thing? It's, okay, here's the risk calculus for each congregant. How do we make it work? For the people that want to be here, how do we make it work? For the people that need to be online, how do we make that work? And that is going to be tough going forward. That is a challenging thing to do. And if we're honest, like Lori started with, we have lost some ground as a congregation. We have lost some membership. And we are going to have to relearn how to be together. But that is what church is for. Learning how to be together, how to talk to strangers, how to sit in silence with people you do not know well, how to talk to old friends, how to see each other's kids grow up, how to be a part of a community that is both deeply personal and beyond ourselves at the same time. So last comparison, and then I'll take questions, then we'll draw this to an end. When you get hurt, either in sports or in life, or in an accident, part of the healing process is rehabilitation. Right? Many, many years ago, I snapped a tendon in my ankle. I couldn't walk without assistance for about 3 months, and it was miserable. It was my senior year at St. Mary's College. I was a player and a coach on the fencing team, which you really can't do if you don't have an ankle. And the doctor prescribed exercises, not exciting ones in the gym, but like stretch your ankle like this. Walk 100 yards. If you're feeling okay, maybe walk 50 more. But it's through that, through what at times is a really painfully slow process, that you get back to where you were before the injury. So we are going to be in congregational rehabilitation for a little while. Literally rehabilitation. We need to reform our habits of being together. We're going to have to relearn some things and build up some tendons and muscles that have atrophied over 2 years. That's okay, because that is actually what church is for. All right, so last note, 5 years now. Somewhere in this pandemic, I went from being the new minister in Lincoln to a well-established partnership. 5 years is not a short ministry anymore. I feel that when I'm at collegial gatherings with UUA ministers, when I'm working around Lincoln, when I show up here on Sunday morning. Part of that's really good. We know each other well at this point. We know each other's eccentricities. You certainly know mine, and I know yours as a congregation. And part of that's hard because even aside from all of the change of the last 2 years, you actually have lost some novelty. You no longer have a new minister. But in both the good and the hard, I'm glad to be doing this work here in Lincoln. So I'm happy to take questions about any of this or any other topics that we have not covered. Before we dive into questions, because I know this has gone a little late, I want to observe that there are about 30 people in this room and there are 50 people in the live chat. We need 65 votes for a quorum. So Please vote. You actually already have the ballot in your email inboxes. It's been sent out at this point, so the next time you pull up your email, it should be right there. It's titled Congregational Ballot, and it should be pretty straightforward. If you do have questions or problems with it, please call the office. We'll be here. But with that, I'm happy to take any questions.
I want to make one response. I was here as president when Oscar came as a new person. We have been so lucky to have you. And now as an AV person, I want to say, we have been so lucky to have you. I don't think we could have done any streaming without you with the resources within AV. So thank you. You deserve senior minister. All right, I see a question over here.
Oscar, I note with dismay that the COVID numbers in Lancaster County are getting worse. We're in high orange, and I guess there's at least a moderate chance we'll move into the red category. Are there any changes in how things will be done necessarily at that point if it happens?
That's a really, really good question. So on November 8th, we passed a new COVID response policy, and that really that said that our priority is to keep the building open. So, no, there will not be any significant changes to the overall functioning of the church. Now, I'll tell this group what I've told both the staff and the worship associates, and what I'm telling people when they ask this question, is that if we get to the point where we are at red on the risk dial, it is not going to be my expectation or the expectation of leadership in this church that it is a requirement to show up in person. Right? So if a staff member or a worship associate comes to me and says, these numbers are getting awfully high, I'm not sure if I can be there on Sunday morning, I'll say, well, we've got this really nice live streaming system, so let's get your parts recorded, and we'll integrate them with the parts that are live, so that each person, whether they are attending or leading on Sunday morning, has the opportunity to participate either in person or remotely. But that will not change sort of our broad focus of a church, which is that we'll stay more or less where we are now if it gets into red. The office hours may shift a little bit for that reason that I just described.
I just think it wasn't mentioned in either report, and it's just not tooting my own horn, but because it isn't just me. But another thing that this church did, which was wonderful as a flexibility, was to do an online auction, which was also very successful. So I want to thank everybody for being flexible and working with us and donating, but also taking the pictures, getting them on, all that was all new. And so I think it was awesome that it worked.
Absolutely. Thank you, Karen.
There is a question on the live stream. Do you hope to get back to 2 services? Yes, absolutely. And this goes back to the if I can continue to use the rehab analogy a little bit, our congregational ankle is a little bit wobbly right now. So we'll stay at 1 service for a while. We'll make sure that we've got that. We're going to hopefully weather this surge over the winter. And then we're going to build our capacity back up. And certainly my goal is to get back to where we were in January of 2020. All right. Well, I see no other questions. So thank you all. Is there anything else on the agenda? Adjourning. All right. Thank you all for your presence. There is one more question. Any plans for coffee soon? Right now, no, because case numbers keep going up. The problem with coffee is the problem of the mask mandate, right? So if we require masking, then we need to expect everybody to have a mask on, take it off when they have a sip of coffee, and put it back on. That is the requirement that the county has right now. A lot of coffee houses don't necessarily follow that requirement, but that is the letter of the law that exists in Lancaster County. I do not want to put myself or any staff members in the position of either enforcing that law during coffee hour or choosing not to enforce it, knowing that it exists. So we're gonna wait a little bit on coffee after the service for now. One more question online. Does this mean that we will be giving Reverend Debus some monetary compensation? No. So there's a conversation happening on the live stream about the other ministers that are attached to this congregation. One is Fritz Hudson. He is our minister emeritus. One is Kimberly Debus. She is our affiliated community minister. If we have an intern, that will be a third, and if we have another community minister, that would be a fourth. That conversation arose in the context of the title conversation. But right now, and for the foreseeable future, those are not compensated positions. The affiliate minister has their own business, they have their own ministry, and for institutional reasons are connected to a church. So we do not pay Reverend Debus, but we support her in her work with the UUA. So we provide members for her committee on ministry, of which Linda Brown is one.
Yes, and she has some obligation to provide some service back to us as a courtesy for what we're extending to her.
Yep. So she'll be out here in May. Her obligation is to preach here once without compensation and to run a workshop here once a year without compensation. We usually cover her flight out of our guest speaker budget line because that seems the polite thing to do. But to answer the direct question, no, we do not pay either our community or emeritus ministers. Any other questions? Seeing none, we will call this meeting to a close. We will extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry with us until we are together again. Thank you all very much. Please go vote. Do not make us send out an e-blast on Tuesday saying we didn't have a quorum. So go vote.